of the world, and then waiting to see if the COVID numbers spike. We've had, I think, close to 1,400 deaths down here, and et cetera, and some crazy. Some people are super into this, and some people think this is a plot to unseat President Trump, and some people see this as a sign of the end times. Some people see this as a Democratic uh, uh, plot to overthrow the world as we know it. I mean, Colorado's a little goofy like that. There's not a lot of. Well, I shouldn't say not a lot of. We're conservative fiscally.
Yeah.
We don't have a brain in our head down here on moral issues like abortion, LGBTQ, a lot of those things. We fiscal conservative, socially progressive, I guess would be the best way.
Um, well, let me start the interview proper, then we can talk about whatever.
Right.
Um, so, I am with a very good friend of mine, as well as my previous pastor in a former, in a long time ago, the esteemed Reverend Doctor Bradley Stoltenow, and he is serving at Shepherd of the Hills. What suburb of Denver is that?
The congregation is located in Centennial, Colorado, um, which is a south suburb of Denver.
Okay.
And I live in Highlands Ranch, which is the southernmost suburb of Denver. And beyond Highlands Ranch is Castle Rock, and beyond Castle Rock is Colorado Springs.
One of the things I've been doing since I've been doing these interviews, it was mostly an opportunity to connect with my congregation, but also trying to encourage young men to go into ministry, and show them all the various ways guys end up, hearing the Lord's call. And so I kind of start off the interviews asking, could you talk about how you came to be in the ministry? What was your call route? How did you end up going to seminary?
Well, all the credit goes to my parents, and of course the good Lord, who, throughout my childhood, I was raised in the church. The highest, you know, my life as a kid revolved around, first and foremost, our home, our church, uh, my dad's business, which was a drugstore, and school. And there was never a time where church wasn't a part of that. And when you're raised in the church and raised to know and love the Lord the way I was, um, and have, in a small town like Ada, I mean, everybody knows everybody, and it was a different time in the late 60s and through the 70s. Everybody, most people shared the faith, even though there were different denominations. I mean, being in church was as natural as being in our living room.
Yeah.
And through the influence of some wonderful, wonderful people, to include your grandfather, it didn't take very long to realize that I had an affinity for wanting to, make church not only my basis for all, faith and life security, but also to become a pastor. I also had great relationships with my pastor, Earl Schmidt,
That's right.
and other adults. As a kid, attended Lutheran Island Camp, where I came into yet more very, very positive role models, and then became a camp counselor there, assistant program director there. And by that time, I had already made the decision to, enter the pre-seminary program at Concordia St. Paul, and the rest is just history.
When you
Um,
went to St. Paul, was that still back in the day when they were still a junior college, funneling into Indiana, Springfield, Indiana, and Seminary St. Louis, or was it already changed to a traditional four-year undergrad program?
it was all four year undergrad, and you know, when you compare how most guys go into the ministry today, the majority of them are second career guys. Um, not all the guys are what we referred to back in the day as system guys. System guys went from high school to a Concordia, got their Greek, their Hebrew, their pre-seminary studies, and then right to the Sem they went. And that's the route that I took. Um, so yeah, it was 8 years in succession.
I think that kind of changed when I was there in the 2000s when it really flipped more towards. I think when I was there was an even balance of system guys and second career guys, but I think after I got done, it really swung more towards the second career guys.
I was able to see a difference even during the 4 years I was at Fort Wayne because most of us who came in, who graduated in 1988, the guys in my class were systems guys, but there were second career guys. I think by the time I was in my fourth year back from Vicarage, the majority of guys who were in that Sem 1 class were second career guys. So I'm not exactly sure if it's a 50-50 thing. I think I'm pretty sure that I've heard that a high number of our guys today are second career guys who've come back to the ministry, who've come back to study for the ministry.
When do you think was the first time the idea of being a pastor crossed your mind? When you were in grade school?
I think probably I was in grade school. I had a lot of I really loved church, um,
Yeah, me too.
and I had a lot of respect for the pastor. I was in awe of the pastor. That model of the pastoral ministry was very much in place. My first pastor that I remember was a guy, pastor by the name of Reinhard Euchre. Um,
I know who
he
that is.
was
Yeah.
he was a very devoted and dedicated man. He was what I would refer to as a fairly typical for that time Midwest, very structured Lutheran. Some guys might refer to that as the Golden Age. Um, he was a great preacher, uh, but he was, uh, that was back in the day when it wasn't Pastor Reinhardt, it was Pastor Euchre or Reverend Euchre.
Yeah.
Um, he just had that countenance about him. But I had a lot of respect for him. Um, I would go over to the church with the lady who was our backdoor neighbor and arrange the flowers and on Saturdays. And when she was arranging the flowers on the altar, I was standing in that pulpit, kind of playing preacher. And that's something that has been spoken about, over and over. And the other thing in Ada, before fellowship was severed with the ALC, is that we respected all the pastors. We respected Father Seitz over at St. Joe's. I mean, if you were a pastor, you were given a lot of respect, and it wasn't so much that respect issue. It's just that we truly admired these pastors.
Yeah.
And as I said, A.A. Drevlo was one that we certainly had a great deal of respect for, and as your grandfather had a very gentle way about him. When Pastor Schmidt came and I was older, he was an easygoing Southern Missourian and just the gentlest guy and very into kids. He did a great job teaching confirmation, although confirmation was pretty prescriptive. This is what you're going to do. This is what you're going to learn, which of course is true on the one hand, but he really did build pretty good relationships with us. And when you have a positive role model in a pastor, and if you have a predisposition or a thought about that, I think in terms of your question, uh, you know, what what influence does that have? I think that makes all the difference in the world. If you have a
Well,
pastor that's not mentoring and portraying that the ministry is, the greatest, in my view, the greatest occupation that you can have, you're not going to have a lot of people, a lot of kids who are going to buy into that.
I can. It's so weird. There's like a three, four tiered thing going on here because it was the same thing for me, and I don't mean to embarrass you, but it was very much. Uh, I had thought about it, but I had never connected with the pastor. I had pastor. Well, he was a former prison chaplain as my confirmation pastor, and we never really connected. But I don't blame that on him. He was just at the end of his ministry, and he had done very hard things. You were the first pastor when we moved to Bismarck that I connected with, and then we would spend time out hunting pheasants
Yeah.
and watch you and my dad smoke cigars and talk. And you were one of the first pastors I kind of wanted to be like, and I kind of looked at you and I thought I could maybe do that. And I think that's a huge thing when it starts crossing your mind, not just that you could, but that you might want to do that. Be that position in the congregation, lead people. And you're right too. Being in the church was just always something I loved. I loved being in the church. I loved singing for Easter and Christmas. I loved playing. I just loved being there. It just seemed as natural as anything to start serving. You know. So let me ask you. You went to Concordia St. Paul, and
Mhm.
was there, other than doing pre-sem, was there kind of an area that you excelled in or that you studied? Was it Greek? Was it theology, history, anything that you were like really focused on, or just general pre-sem studies to get on to Fort Wayne?
I was my college degrees are a double minor in psychology and physical education.
That's right.
Um, uh, to be honest with you, my first year I majored in football and I majored in wrestling.
Okay.
And it took me a while to get in the swing of the real reason why you go to college, and that is to be taught. I did pretty well in Greek, although I started in my freshman year. I did not understand how to study a language, and so I restarted. I audited all those courses I had taken. It was Greek 1 and Greek 2. I re audited those my second year and then went beyond the requirements of the pre seminary program. And my Greek has remained pretty good, but you have to use it, of course.
Yeah.
And I unfortunately, and I regret this to this day, mine was the last class at Fort Wayne that did not have a Hebrew requirement, and
Oh yeah.
I've had to try to pick up on my own some of the basic fundamentals of Hebrew. That was a mistake. Of course, the St. Louis guys who knew they were going to St. Louis, and I was really not. My mind was not made up on Fort Wayne until probably the beginning of my senior year, because I was signed up for the basic courses in Hebrew my senior year, and then what happened was in the fall of my junior year when I wanted to sit and audit those courses again, knowing what my Greek experience was. By then, I knew how to study a language. I was injured playing football,
Oh.
and it knocked me off course um, my my junior year because I tried to take a lighter load of classes in my during the fall, so that I could backload, particularly the spring quarter. Um, so I had every intention of doing that, thinking that I wanted to keep my options open. So, in a very weird kind of way, that kind of de-incentivized me to, follow through with the Hebrew my senior year, which I just regret.
Yeah.
I just regret that. And by the time I got to the seminary, There was a crash Greek program, but because that year there was no Hebrew requirement for my class, there was no summer crash Hebrew course.
Right.
So that was an error. That was an error on my part.
I went in obviously as a with no pre-sem degree, so I had to do both crash and I just would echo what you're saying. I didn't know how to study a language when I studied Greek. I was just floundering, and I managed to pass a qualifier, but Greek has never been a good language for me. By the time I got to Hebrew, then I knew how to study a language, and Hebrew has always been my stronger language of the two. Then, I mean, just it takes a long time to figure out how to learn how to study at seminary. It's a whole nother level of academic rigor.
Right, it is.
So you went to Fort Wayne, and then where did you do your vicarage?
I vicared at St. John's Lutheran Church in Chester, Illinois,
Oh,
which is the Illinois South District.
okay. How was that?
It was a very good experience. I had a vicarage supervisor by the name of Reverend Fred Campbell, who was a retired, I believe he was a colonel in the Air Force. He was a fighter pilot in Korea and Vietnam. And he had no compunction whatsoever dealing with his new vicar. Any edges, any attitudes, any lack of discipline that I had, um, man, that was fixed. Believe me, that was fixed in that year. Or I should say, anything that was left over and residual, I knew better.
Right.
Because he could be a taskmaster, but on the other hand, he was the gentlest, kindest, most caring man who never had a button, a tie, a hair out of place, and wore his patent leather Class A black shoes every Sunday. And what I really appreciated about Fred was, um, he shared with me. It was a large parish that had 3 services, and he desperately wanted somebody to share the pulpit with. And he didn't let me preach right away. By that, I mean the first 2 weeks. But he definitely made it clear to me that if I was able to handle the pulpit, he wanted to share that. He taught me a lot about the preaching task, and I preached every other Sunday for the entire experience,
Wow.
uh, at least every Sunday and sometimes twice a weekend. Um, uh, he challenged me on hard-headed attitudes. Um, uh, being from Minnesota and already seeing some of this is 1980, 85, 86. I was very concerned as a SEM 2, which in many cases makes you just dangerous enough to yourself and all other people. Um, very concerned about the formation of the ELCA, was pretty judgmental about it. And I'll tell you what, he knocked off. He challenged me on just about anything I said because he said, not only do we want to give you a benefit from being here at St. John's, but we need an even keel minded vicar. And so he was very, very good at that. The experience with hospital visits, I had free reign, shut in visits, free reign. Part of that vicarage experience was Menard State Penitentiary, which was a maximum security facility. I got in there often, um, uh, assisting with funerals. He would leave on vacation a couple of times, once for an extended period of time. He left me with his phone number and said, if you have to call, call, but if you don't have to, don't. He built me up, but he also, when he saw a problem, would take me aside, and I got a couple of I got a couple of redresses, if you will, that were as tough as any football coach, position coach I ever
Hmm.
had, and it was for my benefit. So it was a fantastic experience. He had me teaching Bible studies. He had me teaching at that time dialogue evangelism, which was a brand new experience for me. He let me make mistakes. He let me have my victories. I got to tell you this one quick story. I used to spend on those sermons about 30 hours a week, and
Right.
did it just like we were taught. Bowl melody means outline, line of direction. I do the outline. I pour over the exegesis, just pour over it. And then I would write out a manuscript of that sermon, and then I would turn that into him. He would approve it, or he'd red letter it, which there's a lot of red letters at first. And then I would outline my manuscript for use in the pulpit. And I'd have 13 pages of outline, double space and all this business. One Sunday between services, he went up and he scrambled the pages of my outline. And when I came to what was supposed to be page number 3 of the outline, I had some page 9, and I looked at him because it was a clunker moment, right? What am I going to do? And I looked over at him, right, and he had this big grin on his face, and then he does this motion, right, and I was scared to death, right? I felt like I'm naked up there.
Yep.
I went to him after the service and I said, why did you do that? He said, well, who do you think did it? And I said, well, why did you do that? And he said, you don't need a manuscript. You don't need any of that. Those who can should, and those who need it, they should. And this was around Christmas time. So, I've never used anything but one page and the text since then, and I'll never forget that lesson.
Hmm.
Never.
That's awesome. What when you returned to seminary then? Where was your first call to?
I was called to my home district, Minnesota North District, Redeemer Lutheran Church in Deer River, Minnesota, and Centennial Lutheran Church in Squaw Lake, Minnesota. Dual parish, about 30 miles apart, and in the beautiful Chippewa National Forest. And
Wow.
it was I had hoped to be an associate pastor in a large church. I wanted to be in a large church, and um, for guys who going back to that uh, going back to that PE minor that I had, when I left Ada to go to college, my mother was not real sure that I was going to make it as a student. And she said to me once, Brad, if you weren't going to be a pastor, what do you think you would do? And I said, well, Ma, I probably would, I don't know, might be a teacher and probably a coach. Well, maybe you ought to get a start on a degree, in that direction, just in case. And so when I got to the seminary, I coached all the way through my seminary years to make some extra money, and at one point thought that I might want to be in secondary education. So there was a time in which I was slotted for a call to a high school out in New York, and when I got to thinking about that. Lord, did you put me here to be a football coach and a wrestling coach, or did you put me here to be a pastor in a parish? And when I thought about it, uh, I, 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 I felt that it was to be a pastor in a parish setting. So, you don't always get in your home district, but instead of the slotting that I was hoping to get, which
Right.
was an associate, And I'd have gone anywhere except I wasn't too keen on going where it's really hot and humid. I end up in those two parishes, and it truly was to me paradise. I mean, it really was. They were a loving group, and I enjoyed them very much. I really, really did.
And it's a
And
beautiful
then,
area of the country too.
well, and then all the hunting and fishing,
Yeah.
and I had, here's the thing: the Lord gave me back football, and I was the head wrestling coach there for 4 years.
Really?
Yeah, so uh, you know, it's that's always been a testament to how God works, relative to sometimes you get your cake and you get to eat it too.
Yeah. So was Zion then your call from Deerfield then?
Yeah, in 1992, I got the call to Zion and Bismarck, and again, I'd grown very fond of Deer River, but the truth is that my motor just ran faster than what those parishes required. And that's not to say that, they were, that it was beneath me. I don't want you to think that.
No, of course.
It's just that what they wanted, uh, and what I thought they needed, they were very, very happy with that. But I felt that I was capable of more in a larger setting. In other words, the more um, um, complex, I should say.
Right.
The issues of small churches and large churches are essentially the same, right? Law and gospel, sin and grace. Human, just the nature of humanity. But my motor just ran at a higher pace, and so I accepted that call. I'd had four or five. I think I had four calls while I was in Deer River, and that one I think was my fifth one or fourth one. I can't remember. And Bismarck was a place that my mother grew up there. My grandparents lived there. I went there as a kid. I knew that church, or had visited it, and I was just ecstatic to get that call. I mean, to be honest with you, I got that call. I couldn't believe it. And I was very fortunate to know within about an hour and a half that that was where I needed to be. I still
You.
prayed over it,
Oh,
but that's how it felt.
no, I understand what you're saying. The you were there for how many years then? 92 through.
I was there from 92 to 2006, so 14 years.
That's right. Uh, and lots of really wonderful things happened. In fact, they started a school during your time there at the church in the in Zion Lutheran's building.
They
Lots
did.
of amazing things that happened. Anything you want to talk about in terms of your time at Zion?
You know, Bismarck was the best place we ever lived. To be honest with you, Ryan, I think about Bismarck in North Dakota every day, and I don't say that as hyperbole. I really do think about it. All the things that I love are there. Um, Again, the Lord put wrestling coaching back in my life in a
Mm-hmm.
top 50 nationally ranked program.
Yep.
Um, I got to coach football a couple of years, a state championship one year. The people at Zion were amazing. They were conservative. They were dedicated to the gospel. They were Lutherans and they understood why.
Yep.
The church was, at that time, I think we counted about 1,400 members. Some of those, of course, were inactive. It was a very rich time and the best friends I've ever had. And the greatest mentor I ever had was your dad.
Yeah. We have that in common.
I learned more about I learned the difference between management and leadership from your father. I learned, um, you know, how to interact with people. Uh, I learned. I learned. management and leadership skills, working with, it started out with AAL, then it went LB, then it went Thrivent. Your dad was just masterful. And of course, your dad and I are close friends, are still good friends, although I don't see him as often, of course.
Well, it's hard.
But
You're in Denver, and he's in Bismarck.
but the thing with your dad and your mother, but there were other people, but no one more so than your dad. Was he's 10 years older than I. We share so many of the same experiences growing up in the same place.
Right.
But your dad was gentle, he was kind, he was loving. But if I irritated him, he had zero compunction to grab me and say, "Listen, pal, you're wrong on this." And that relationship was so real, so organic. I had other ones like that. You know who I was friends with because we shared many of them. Your family and my family
Yep.
shared a lot of them. That was a thrill. Learning how to work with another pastor was both a challenge, and then uh, it turned out to be a very good experience, right? That was interesting. Um, as much as I thought my motor ran faster for a larger church, you really don't know what 1,000 to 1,400 people are like until you get in that.
Yep.
Just the sheer increase of hospital calls, crisis, pastoral care and counseling, and all of the things, the weddings. Um, that's one of the most beautiful sanctuaries I think still on the face of earth. All of the different people and personalities, professionals,
Mm-hmm.
farmers, this entire mixture of people. It was just every day that I was there, um, as I look back, um, was a training ground for what the Lord had next when I came here.
Well,
Um, and 14 years as an associate, it's almost unheard of in the church, almost unheard of. And Pastor and I had different personalities, to be sure, and to learn how to work through the challenges of coming together, forming a team, how to move forward, how to complement each other, how to work off of each other. It was just, we cried when we left because we left behind wonderful people, but it was time. It was time. It was time. The Lord knew what He was doing.
yeah, and you serve now a larger church. You're the head pastor now.
I am.
So how did things change in respect to going from being an associate to being a head sole pastor?
So at Zion, we had a fairly small staff because we had the preschool all along. But there was myself, Pastor Marcis, there was Gail Little. We had some part-time receptionists. We had a buildings and grounds person. And then, as I said, the preschool teacher. And then Martin Luther was in our building, but Martin Luther was run independent. It was an association school.
Right.
And, you know, we didn't have a day-to-day responsibility for Martin Luther any more than any of the other churches had, even though it was in our building. When I came to Shepherd, um, you you what I did was towards the end of my time in Bismarck, uh, Pastor and I had a kind of a partnership ministry,
Sure.
because by then we had certainly learned and had for some time how to deal with, here's what you're good at, here's what I'm good at.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be complementary in that regard. And so then I started thinking, geez, 14 years, and I think I'm ready for the next step.
Right.
Um, but I needed 14 years of still having my hard head, you know, under your dad's, bear paw, trying to get me to think correctly on some things.
Well, I've got
When
you
you
beat.
get
I've had about 35 years underneath his
there, you
elbow,
go.
so don't worry
Um,
about it.
but when I became the lead pastor here at Shepherd, or what many call senior pastor, I'm in charge of the whole trajectory of the ministry that includes a staff of a total staff at that time of about 53 people.
Right.
And while I'm not on day-to-day supervision of many of them, I had my own ministry staff responsible for the spiritual health and morale in a real way, um, of the entire outfit, and saw the lay leadership of our church just do a marvelous job. But there's just so many more things you have to consider
Yeah.
when you look at the broad picture from a 30,000-foot view, and then have to plug in so many different areas. And what they asked from me here was a sense of, having lost some of their Lutheranism, and they wanted it back.
Right.
And I was, and going in there, and your dad, I remember one day he said, "Well, what is the transition plan? What's your transition plan?" And I said, "Transition plan?" I said, "There's no transition plan. Nobody gives you anything when you go from one church to the other." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "Well, you got to have a transition plan." I says, "I don't even know anything about a transition. What should a transition plan be?" And your dad looked at me. We were at lunch, right? Should we
Yeah.
work or shall we eat? Well, it was always we shall eat. And he said, "My advice to you is go down there and keep your mouth shut and learn them, learn their culture. Do your preaching, do your teaching, stay off of making decisions, don't move the furniture around right away, and learn your people. Listen to your people." Best advice I've ever gotten. And he said, "Brad, you're a leader, you're expressive. Um, back away from that a little bit. Use those gifts in the responsibilities of the ministry, but be careful that you don't come on too strong too early." And it was everything I could do to learn the culture. And there's a lot of culture down here. This is not Lutherville. This is not Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, the strongholds of Lutheranism. We're an island down here, and we are the minority of Christians, even in Denver.
Right.
And when I say small minority, I mean a small minority. We are living here in the midst of the overwhelming midst of evangelicalism, non-denominationalism.
Right.
Although it really isn't, it's most of these churches are associated denominationally, but they market themselves and try to look like non-denoms.
Right.
So I had to learn the culture of my own church. I had to learn the culture of my culture. In general, I had to learn to live in a big city, Denver, and the tasks and responsibilities of being a lead pastor are many. It was a bigger job than I thought. It really was. And so, you take the advice that you get from people like Roger, and you go with following your leadership. I also had a great DP at the time. He also thought, uh, let's not move a lot of furniture. Let's learn the church, preach, teach, do what they know you can do. And then, it's an acquired skill set. I still learn. And after having been here now 14 years, finishing up my 14th year this summer, matter of fact, this coming June, um, I wouldn't say that everything is second nature, but I will say that throughout the ministry, being in a small dual, being at Zion Bismarck, being here, it's really been a fulfilling, wonderful experience. As you know, in the ministry, there are going to be the days that you just would like to forget. Um, I certainly have some of those, no doubt. But that comes with the territory. But the overwhelming time in the ministry, and I mean overwhelming to the point that there's no comparison between those and the tough days. It's just been a great blessing that the Lord has given me.
Well, I have to admit I'm a little disappointed that I can't see what has happened there. I've heard good things. I know I saw your ministry in close up in person when I was in Bismarck, obviously, but I've heard very good things about the things that have happened in there up in Denver, and I don't know if I don't know. It sounds weird to say, but since I look a little bit like my dad and I sound like him, I'll tell you, I'm proud of you and what
A
you've done
little
up there.
bit,
Well, a lot, a lot.
right down to the suspenders, bro.
Yeah, there you go. Since we're kind of like coming in that direction, I wanted to ask you, you a guy who has a lot of it's kind of I was thinking in my head when you said 15 years. You've been there longer than I've been in ministry completely, like totally. You've been at your church there in Denver just longer than I've been in. What would you say right now? And this is a big question, so go in any direction you want to go in. But what's your greatest joy in ministry right now?
My greatest joy. I still love the pulpit. Uh, Absolutely love the pulpit. Um, Working with leaders and groups and being with the people in the various activities of the church, being privileged to the point where when families are in their darkest times,
Yeah,
that they invite me into that,
yeah,
into that is something I never take for granted. Um, of course, when we strategize on a ministry concept and it works well, I get a lot of fulfillment out of that. The fact that they told me in 2006, Pastor, if you lead, we'll follow. We talk a lot about leadership in the church. Volumes are published every day about leadership, but we don't talk nearly enough about followership. The fact that they've kept their promise to me every day has been very rewarding. I mean, it's a symbiotic thing now, right? Um, but you have to earn trust in the ministry. You have to earn it. It's not like the days of Pastor Euchre and your grandpa, where the day you show up, it's instant respect. I mean, you get a certain amount of respect because you're a pastor, but you have to earn it every day. I've been very blessed in all of the churches um, that, despite some of my shortcomings, right, that I've been loved and etc. and taken care of as they said they would, and so having that experience has just been fantastic. So I would say the pulpit, um, uh, the honor of being invited into the tough times,
yeah,
and then the sharing of the celebrations. I mean, it's about the people, right? It's
yeah.
about the people.
What would you
And of
say?
course, being loyal to the word of God. Let's not forget that.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think we can assume some things. We're both pastors in the LCMS, right?
Right.
The My question then, maybe to flip that, and I was thinking about what you said, being invited for the hard times. This COVID thing has been terrible. I've got some people in my church who are suffering, and I can't get to them. So I might ask you, along with maybe that, what are some of the difficult things right now for you? Difficult things in ministry, hard things about ministry.
Are you talking about currently or have been?
Anything. You wide open. You pick.
When I left the seminary, the last voice I remember hearing was Dr. David Scare, and we were in NC 201 where we met as a class for field work. And in typical David Scare fashion, he cracked a bunch of jokes. And then he said to us, as I remember, gentlemen, please know that we are, happy for you. But please buckle up and buckle up tight, because you guys in your careers will see the greatest amount of change on the landscape of not only Christianity, but the greatest amount of change on the landscape of Lutheranism that we've ever seen. And of course, we got our calls, finals are done. Half of us had our moving vans packed, and so some of the guys, I'm sure, just kind of blew that off. But I can tell you that David Scare's been right every single year. Ministry has gotten harder. I can't go back and say this year this was hard, the next year the next thing was hard, but incrementally
Yeah.
from that first day in the ministry to the one that we're talking on right now, ministry's gotten harder. The hard things for me, I mean, the two hardest things for me, uh, on a procedural level, is funerals for children and uh, watching marriages crumble between people that just cannot find their way to repairing it.
Yeah.
And part of that is cultural, and part of that is theological. God is love, therefore, because God is love, and if God loves me, God wants me to be happy. Therefore, if this makes me happy, God is going to be okay with that, because God is love. And if you love somebody, they want you to be happy. And breaking apart my marriage for whatever reason makes me happy, ergo that's okay. Now that's very that's a quick summary, but it's hard for me to watch that kind of suffering. I was trained through CPE for the hospitals. Certainly, those are some tough nights, some tough things to watch. But again, you're privileged to be there,
Yeah.
because that's not, they don't have to ask you there.
Right.
Um, uh, the hard things in the ministry, I mean, let's be honest. You pour your heart and soul into ministry, and then you watch your attendance numbers drop. Uh, you see the competition for people's time, and people are busier now, more stressed out now. Church Regular church attendance is no longer measured on a weekly basis. You have to count, how many times a person is in church in a month. Regular church attendance, again, is not every Sunday like when you and I were kids.
Right.
Um, and I don't think it's necessarily that people are less committed, it's that they're more distracted. And certainly activities ranging from youth sports to, we travel more now than we ever have. So, we go here, we go there, we go everywhere. And the financial realities of the church, church economics right now, and has been for, probably the last decade, here in Colorado, and I would suspect, just about anywhere else, are very, very challenging.
Yeah.
And uh, what people want is the highest quality ministry. God always provides ministry, but sometimes higher quality ministry means that ministry costs money. And for those of us who live, eat, sleep, and drink this stuff day and night, which I do, and I know you do, we're never not thinking about it. And it's very easy for pastors to feel that they're not doing a good job when they see a lack of participation,
Yeah.
a lack of numbers. I mean, this silly conversation that we have, that numbers don't matter. No, numbers do matter. It is not the end all be all standard and measure, but if you had 800 members worshiping in your church, 2 years ago, and you've got 500 today, you better believe numbers matter, and you better find out why that is.
Right.
Now, that could be your own darn fault as a preacher, not being a good shepherd. Obviously, the political meanderings of a congregation are always in can be in constant flux. I think we forget that the devil works harder to mess up churches and pastors and Christian people than he spends on everybody else because he's got everybody else, right? Um, uh, but it, the pressures are many and various, and then those are oftentimes offset by when you as a preacher uh, you think you just preached a real bummer of a sermon, and a dozen people come out and say, Reverend, that's the best sermon I ever heard. Or, you pray your brains out and wring your hands over, a person or a couple or a family. And you just think to yourself, this is going to go south. And the next thing you know, um, they're reconciled or the problem worked out. I mean, and you just know that was a God thing, right? God kept his promises, and you've been preaching it, so why wouldn't you expect it?
Right.
But it's easy to become cynical from time to time because I think as dutiful cultural Lutherans, the way I am, and I'll bet the way you are, it's easier to remember the, the losses than it necessarily is to celebrate the victories.
Yeah.
And I think that comes directly out of a dutiful, modest, not always very celebrative culture that I certainly came out of, right? Um, and I don't know if that's true for you necessarily, but you know, you work and you work and you work until the job is done, and you don't get credit for what you were supposed to do. That I know is your background to a certain extent. So I think we do tend from time to time to be our own worst critics as pastors. We also, I think, allow the minority of voices that don't like the way we part our hair, or don't like the color of our shoes, or don't like how our kids act, or don't like how our wives are dressed. We tend to let those things get to us.
Yeah.
And how can we not? We're men, right?
Yeah.
We're husbands and we're fathers, and sometimes those things can be difficult. And I'm thankful that I haven't had much of that. But I think that the bummer of the thing is that the culture is definitely swinging away from the church,
Yeah.
and certainly from orthodox expressions of the church.
Yes.
And some of those who preach, I want to be careful with this, but who may be preaching a different gospel, they seem to thrive.
Yeah.
They seem to uh, be doing better, and then the devil puts a certain amount of jealousy in your life or tempts you to let it be produced, and then we're comparing ourselves to everybody else when the issue is be ye faithful,
Right.
and do your job, and understand that there are critics. I think one of the very most naive attitudes I had, certainly when I got to in the ministry all the way through Deer River and into Bismarck, is we do not realize as preachers that leadership is a contact sport. You are going to get elbowed. You are going to get hit in the back of the head with a 2x4, and then you're going to turn around, and nobody's going to take responsibility for the shot you just took.
Yeah.
And you got to live with it, and you got to eat it.
Yeah.
And then you go home, and you're affected by these things. You may not sleep, and your wife has to deal with it, and then the pressures of being a preacher's wife. I mean, I think these are somewhat ubiquitous with a lot of preachers.
Yeah.
And I've had some of that. I certainly take more responsibility upon me. See, I think sometimes I'm the Holy Spirit, right? When in fact I'm not. And, that's just how it goes. but there's a certain amount of suffering uh, or tentatio in the office,
Yeah.
and we underestimate what that is.
Yeah, that's actually really well said. I think the tentatio, we ignore that part. We kind of think it's, I think because when you start going into ministry, everyone who hears you want to be a pastor, they really just, they light up and they're excited for you and they treat you like you walk on water. Um, and then you get out there and that's when the tentatio, you kind of get a false sense of things. And then you get into ministry and you realize that's how your parents, that's how the people you grew up with in Zion are going to treat you. But it's not going to be the people that you're sent to as a shepherd because they got different problems and they're expecting things out of you as their pastor.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes the expectations are not realistic,
Yeah.
and your ability to deal with those unrealistic expectations. Again, um, if I choose to think about some of the defeats, to use that win loss type of thing, I can pull up a lot of them. I just choose not to think of them. It's only taken me, um, up until this current day to deal with some of that, because everybody's going to take their shots
Yeah.
in the ministry.
Yeah. Um, I got to ask you, are you still coaching? Sorry to change the subject so rapidly, but I was
Oh,
curious.
good. No, I retired from coaching 4 years ago.
Oh, really? But up until
I,
4 years ago, you were still coaching.
yeah, I was coaching wrestling. I coached a little football out at Lutheran High Parker, and got to the point where I made a commitment to that wrestling program. I actually started it. I made a commitment of 3 years, and my 3 years was up. And it's a young man's. I shouldn't say younger man's game, but um, the it was just time.
Yeah.
My neck and my shoulders. Um, taking all those shots under those heavyweights takes a toll on
I distinctly remember in '94 going on a youth gathering trip and you in one of the hotel rooms wrestling five different guys and handily beating all five of us.
you.
What did you were 6'5", right? 6'6",
6'3".
6'3", and you were built like a refrigerator truck, a
Right.
refrigerator. I mean, you just picked guys up and threw them around, and good grief. I have another question, a little off topic. What's Joe up to? I see pictures of him all the time, off in foreign lands. What's he doing?
He's in Cambodia. He's married now to Via, who is from Cambodia. They have a son, Ray,
Mm-hmm.
named after my now departed sainted father. He runs an organization that is his own called Ray of Hope. He picks up kids off the streets, out of the dregs of that culture, cleans them up, feeds them, gets them to school, brings them back, feeds them, tutors them, does Bible class with them so that the gospel is preeminent, and then they take them back to where these kids live,
That's
and
amazing.
has been doing that now for five years on his own. And he worked for another organization prior to that that did almost the same thing called Crossing Cambodia. So he's been in Cambodia all these years.
It's got
He's
to make
doing
a
great.
it's got to make a dad proud.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Joe never liked school too much. He loved everything about school except school, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he did okay towards the. I mean, he did all right. I mean, he was a C, got B's and C's, but school wasn't his thing, and he kind of floundered. He joined the service, was colorblind, came back. I mean, he refused to change his MOS. He wanted to be infantry and perhaps a ranger. And when they found out he couldn't read the color coded maps, they said, "Son, you just can't. We just can't let you go forward." So he came out, and he kind of floundered because he was mad at me, his mother, God, the president, the army. Uh, got a couple of jobs at some movie theaters, and then finally landed a position with a a engineering company where he was out doing slump tests on cement. And, here's my son, on multi-million-dollar projects, saying the cement's not right, he can't move forward. Had his own truck, right, from the company, was in his own apartment, had his own insurance, everything was going great. And then he goes on a mission trip to Cambodia with his mom. So you see the hand of God in this too, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so he's doing great.
That's
We're very,
fantastic.
very proud of him.
And your daughters are you have several grandkids already now, right?
Yeah, we've got five, excuse me, four. Kylie is in Chaska with her husband Matt, and she's going to have a baby in September. And so we're looking forward to meeting him or her. And then Anna is in Chicago with Willa, Asher, and Axel. And my oldest granddaughter just had her 10th birthday yesterday.
Wow, that's amazing.
And we just can't see those kids enough. But we don't get to see them very as much as I'd like to. Jody sees them a little bit more often. And then, of course, now with COVID, nobody's seeing anybody.
My my oldest, Graceland, is 9.
Wow.
I have
Ryan.
I have 4 kids of my I have 4 kids, and I have 2 foster kids in the house. It's a full house right now.
Wow. Good for you, man. I see pictures on Facebook.
Yeah, they're amazing. I'm thankful for each and every one of them. They're all different. They're all unique. They're all awesome. Being a
Yeah,
dad is a pretty amazing thing. I love it.
it
It's
really, really is.
I would make a claim that being a dad is probably one of the few things I'm good at. And I wouldn't, and that'd be pushing it maybe. I don't know if I'm great at it, but I'm pretty good at being a dad. I like being a dad, so
That's that's so important. Your first congregation is at home. Your first love's got to be at home.
yeah,
You're married. We got to be, as pastors, we got to be married to our wives and not our collars.
yeah. All right, I have some rapid fire questions to close.
Okay.
Favorite movie?
When we were soldiers,
Good one. Favorite book of the Bible, or I'll take favorite verse.
uh, it'll be the book of Matthew, and it will be when I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was in prison, did you visit me? Etc. Etc.
Yeah, that always yeah, that gets me too. That's a good one. That's a good choice. Favorite or not favorite recent book that you read that you enjoyed. What's kind of on your desk? What have you read recently that you really liked?
Um, I read a lot of books that I don't necessarily enjoy because I read a lot of stuff that I read for the purpose of trying to find out what other people are thinking. Some of it is drudgery. In terms of, well, I've got one right here. Um, when I was in my first DMin course, I came into contact with William Williman.
Oh yeah, I've heard of him.
He's got a book out now called Stories, and these are a compilation of some stories, sermons, things that he wrote. He is just a fantastic. He was a bishop in a Methodist church, and he was teaching at Duke University. So I've enjoyed that. Um, I read a book that really made me think. It's not brand new, but it's recent, called Canoeing the Mountains,
Hmm.
talking about paradigm shifts in the church. How we need to think about church going forward. And I'm not talking about theology. I'm talking about uh, the ongoing nature of congregational life,
Right.
leadership, etc. There are certain things, like you said, there are non-negotiables in the ministry.
Yeah.
But how we organize and how we deal with and how we are exegetes of culture and exegetes of the word and make those linkages within the life of the parish are just very, very important. And the only way you can exegete the culture is to know what the heck's going on out there,
Yeah.
and understand those things. And so I would say those two are on my list. I read. Um, so I would say right now, stories by William Willimon is the most recent.
Before, I don't want to forget this because it came to my mind, and I've been meaning to tell you for a little while. You were just saying, not too recently, you were talking about how the devil doesn't work as hard as people who are outside of the church. And I have actually told this story to my Bible study classes. I might have even, in my Bible study classes. I don't think I've used it in a sermon, but I've actually told a story about how you told me while we were sitting at the back of a truck one day, and I was struggling with the fact, why doesn't why doesn't everyone come after Muslims as much as they come after the church? And you said, Ryan, the devil's already got them. He's not going to come after the Muslims. He's going to come after the church. And that stuck with me my entire life, and I've even used it as an analogy to my own congregation. I thought you might like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Favorite food?
Favorite food? Well, I love seafood, but I would have to say I am a carnivore, so anything that is roasted on a barbarian.
That's an inside joke. My dad had a big grill called the Barbarian, and he would rotisserie big pieces of meat. It was a good time had by all. The Barbarian lives, by the way. I don't know if I told you that. Joel fixed it up, and it's still running.
There we go.
Yeah. Dog or cat?
Dog.
Do you still have labs?
I do. I
All
got
right.
one in training up in North Dakota right now.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Norman.
Yeah. So that's got to be what, your fourth, fifth lab?
Fourth one. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Love
We
them.
we started off with a Maltese poodle, and she recently passed away. That was kind of a bummer. But we also have a um, uh, golden retriever poodle mix. We do it because the hypoallergenic stuff. But
Right.
anyway, he's bigger. He's our first big dog, and he's big and black. But I don't think he's going to be a bird dog. He's a little too much of a weenie. So, um, one place you would really like to visit.
One place that I'd like to visit. Um, I'd like to see Alaska.
Oh, I thought you had already gone to Alaska.
Mm.
That would be.
There, there are places in Europe, of course, and I've not been to Europe. But uh, right now, I think Alaska would be really cool to see.
Yeah, it would be. You're right. And I'm adding an extra rapid fire for you.
Yeah,
Favorite thing to hunt?
hands down, without a shadow of a doubt, pheasants.
Yeah, that you're gonna. The people around here in South Dakota are gonna like to hear that. Yeah, that's a big deal around here. Do you get out to go pheasant hunting much in Colorado?
Occasionally, the habitat here is limited. They're found out in eastern Colorado. Eastern Colorado is very arid.
Right.
The land that is available that holds birds is all locked up relative to pay for hunt. Hunting clubs, and hey, you know what? If that's how they have to do it, that's how they have to do it. And somebody owns that land, and it's their choice to let you on or not let you on. But I've hunted in Kansas, have had a number of good hunts in Kansas. But it's not like back in Bismarck where you can throw the dog in the kennel and grab your gun and
Yeah.
6 8 shells, and you can be in pheasant ground in 20 minutes or half an hour and come home with two or three.
I miss hunting at Shram's. You're right. We could jump in the car, be out there in what, 40 minutes? Less than
Easy,
that? and,
right?
and out hunting. And it wasn't the best pheasant hunting in the whole world, But there's something to be said about being able to get out anytime you wanted to, any time of day. Get out there, hit them, and then come back home. And I miss that a lot. I miss those hunting trips out there, and going with the dogs, and
Right.
hunting with my dad, and I miss hunting with my brother Joel. I really do. He was always fun to have with when we were hunting. I miss him too.
You remember were you with us the first time he fired your dad's Satori?
I don't think so.
Yeah, he was just he was a he was he wasn't a big kid,
Yeah.
and he saw your dad's beautiful Browning, and he said, I think I want to shoot it. So your dad put a shell in, and Joel was ready to fire it. He fired it, and it just about almost knocked him over. And his eyes got real big, and he looked at your dad, right? And I'll never forget that. Every kid does that, right? It's time to shoot the 12 gauge,
Yeah.
and he learned what a Browning Satori with four shot felt like.
My dad, I remember in East Grand Forks, my dad was he had the it was late fall and the pumpkins were all done, and they were sitting out there in the garden, so we were shooting the shotgun at the pumpkins, and he let me shoot one, and the same thing happened. I think I did fall over. I was so little, and the thing darn near took my shoulder off, and I fell down, but it was love at first sight.
Yeah,
I
I
love.
do get back to Bismarck every year. I've done that every
Oh,
year.
you do?
Yep. A buddy of mine from here, he's got a dog. Matter of fact, he's got a brand new lab. He just got trained. Mine is up in North Dakota at Hawaii Kennels getting trained. And so we hunted last year with no dog. Uh, you'll
Oh,
remember the kennel that we had our dogs trained.
yeah.
That dog trainer loaned us a dog,
Okay.
and he was okay. He was a Springer, uh, but he was young and he had never hunted before, and it was just a different experience. But yeah, I get up there. I get up there just about every year for about 7 or 8 days.
Yeah.
We hunt until we're darn near tired
I can't see how that'd be possible.
of it.
I've got a couple of members from this congregation that are really wonderful, and they'll take me out once or twice a year pheasant hunting, and it's just the best. Um,
Oh,
and I've got another member of the congregation, different member, who will take me out deer whitetail hunting as well, and
oh yeah,
I'm just so thankful for that. It's such great time. You get to kind of let your guard down and be a different kind of guy around people, and they see a different side of you, and uh, and it's just so much fun too.
it is.
Can't beat it with a stick, as my dad used to say.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. I love it. I
Well,
miss it every day.
yeah, they are doing well. They moved into their new place, and he had a shoulder surgery, and so he's feeling better now. And I think things are going a little better for them right now. So I'm really happy about that. In fact, it's too bad we couldn't do this interview like Friday because they're coming down for the weekend.
Ah,
They're gonna come down and see us. They finally feel like it's safe enough for them to come down. We haven't seen them since Thanksgiving last year, so
oh my.
come down and see the kids.
Yeah. We've stopped in there. I've stopped into your folks' place a number of times, and I've been there a couple of times. They haven't been there, but I know your dad loves the Twins, and of course the Vikes,
Yeah,
and I mean, really, who wouldn't, right?
yeah.
But with no baseball right now, and he having to be laid up, I bet you he's coming out of his mind. No baseball.
They spend a fair amount of time outside,
Do
and
they?
they're trying to manage it. But yeah, my mom and dad are big baseball nuts, and not having the games this year has been real tough on dad.
Yeah,
It's been
yeah.
tough on me. I mean, what am I talking about? I watch if I could afford that cable package, I'd watch every single one of those games if I could. So
Right.
yeah, I miss them too.
Yeah. Amen. Amen.
Well, hey, I don't want to take any more of your time. I appreciate it so much. This is a fantastic interview, and just so I've said it, you know,
Huh.
whatever things that you did that stuck in my brain that led to me ending up where I ended up, I thank you. Thank you for being a good pastor to me. Appreciate it.
Very kind. You're most welcome. I'm proud of you, and this is still, in my view, I would do this again, even knowing about those hard days. I'm proud of you. You come from great stock. Your mom and dad have meant as much to you as mine have to me, and um, uh, you know, just keep preaching the gospel, man, and loving your people, and anything that I passed along to you that's meaningful, I praise God for, and um, you're doing fine, brother. You're doing fine.
Thank you so much.
All right, Ryan. See you again.
We'll talk to you later.
You bet. Bye bye.